What's going on? What's going on?
Work that shit. Work. Work that shit. Work. Work that shit. Work. Work that shit.
So, just getting ready for tonight, 8 p.m. around 8:15 to 10 p.m. We will be having a talk about R. Kelly, child molestation, sexual abuse, and a couple of other things, and talk about how all of these different topics intersect. And I will have two guests on, and possibly more guests. Hopefully, we'll have some people on to comment and see what they have to say as well. So I really interesting here. I was looking for something for R. Kelly, but a new study suggests police killings of black men are mislabeled. What do you mean mislabeled? The fuck does that mean? This new study reiterates a problem in the police reform movement: the lack of data on how many black men are killed by police. Reverend Al Sharpton and other accountability partners say they need a guarantee that mislabeling police killings will stop. What do they mean by mislabeling police killings? Like, let's hear.
Washington and published in the medical journal The Lancet. This week, it analyzed data from the last 40 years, and it found that more than half of the police killings over that time had been attributed to other causes. But it gets worse. The study disaggregated its findings by race, and the numbers are staggering. Since 1980, black people were 3.5 times more likely to die from police violence than white people. That finding lines up with data from the 2019 study from Proceedings in the National Academy of Sciences, which found that 1 in 1,000 black men and boys will die at the hands of police.
That's insane.
1 in 1,000.
That is insane.
Among all races, more American men died in 2019 during police encounters than from testicular cancer. And while there are multiple national health campaigns urging men to get checked for cancer, those of us who advocate for police reform are routinely dismissed as anti-police when we're only standing against police violence and corruption. This new study reiterates a problem in the police reform movement: a lack of data. Those of us in the movement have known about this problem for years, and this study just confirms it. Way back in 2015, then FBI Director James Comey testified to Congress about the lack of a centralized national database of police killings, calling it unacceptable that newspapers were the leading source of that information. And still there has been little progress on that front. Some nonprofit groups and newspapers like The Guardian and The Washington Post have kept their own database. But we need more than that. We need justice for those killed by police, those thousands of Americans who have had their killings covered up and misreported. And we need guarantees that this mislabeling of police killings will stop. That's why we march and why we have to keep demanding police reform and accountability. I am not against all police. I am against a broken system that brushes violence and death under the rug, a system that kills blacks and browns at a higher rate than anyone else. We cannot continue under a system like this. It is long past time to rise up together and demand accountability. Demand it from your local police precinct, your city council, state government, all the way up to ladder to police reform at a federal level. Injustice does not rest, so neither can we.
All right. Well, there you have it. You know what? I dig it. Okay, Al Sharpton. You know what? I fuck with it. But, a lot of that is stuff we already know and feel. But, he got his own show now, so he talking to them white folk. Hopefully they'll soak some of that shit up. U.S. immigration policies toward Haitians have long been racist, advocates say. Images from the banks of the Rio Grande last week depicted U.S. Border Patrol agents on horseback swinging long reins as they attempted to round up Haitian migrants who sought refuge at the border. One agent could be heard in a video yelling insults at the migrants. The scenes evoked a darker era of the nation's history from the 1800s, when slave patrols were used to control the movements of Black people. But to some experts and advocates, the Biden administration's treatment of Haitian immigrants has not been surprising. When asylum seekers or Black immigrants are confronted by state power, whether it be the local police or on the streets or federal agents, they're confronted in a violent manner on different levels than what we see happening with migrants that are not Black. It's something that I've been saying and something that I don't think gets talked about much. They sure as hell don't talk about it in the media. For immigrant rights advocates like Nana Gyamfi, who's the executive director of Black Alliance for Just Immigration, the federal government's policies toward Haitian migrants in recent weeks only reinforces what they have long known. Haitians and other Black immigrants fare differently under the U.S. immigration system than migrants who aren't Black. The Biden administration has admitted some Haitians, but deported many others. There are many reasons thousands of Haitians are even making the perilous journey to the U.S. Some left their home country for South America more than a decade ago, fleeing catastrophic earthquake that happened in 2010 that killed hundreds of thousands of people and initially displaced more than 1 million. Those that stayed saw their already struggling nation destabilize further, and since then, Haiti has never fully recovered. This year, as the country battled a global pandemic and an acute hunger crisis, the country's then president was assassinated in July, and a month later, a 7.2 magnitude earthquake killed more than 2,000 Haitians and left thousands more injured. The gang violence and poverty that Haitians were already facing got worse. Their compounding effects of those circumstances have prompted many Haitians to leave their homes in search of a better life. To some extent, the U.S. government has acknowledged just how dangerous conditions are in Haiti. Earlier this year, the Biden administration announced an estimated 100,000 Haitians in the U.S. would be newly eligible to apply for temporary protected status, which would allow them to remain lawfully in the country for 18 months. But the humanitarian protections apply only to those already in the U.S. as of July 29th. And so in recent weeks, tens of thousands of migrants, most of them Haitians, gathered at a makeshift encampment in Del Rio, Texas, which if you look at the other podcasts that I've posted, it was like 14,000 people huddled underneath this bridge, and that was where you saw the depictions of, what we saw last week. Those migrants sat there in hopes of being processed by the U.S. immigration system. This surge of migrants caught U.S. immigration authorities by surprise, and officials began ramping up deportation flights to deter more Haitians from coming to the border. Within days, the camp had been cleared. Some migrants were convinced to cross the border back to Mexico. Some were taken into federal custody, and some were released into the U.S. Others, however, were expelled to Haiti without a chance to make a case for asylum, which is not allowed. They were forced to return to a homeland more dangerous than the one they initially fled. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas has cited 3 reasons why migrants might be released into the U.S. instead of expelled. They've determined to be vulnerable, such as someone who is pregnant, operational capacity is strained, or the person could face torture if they were sent back. Those migrants would still need to complete immigration proceedings where an immigration judge will ultimately determine if they can remain in the U.S. or be deported. Advocates, however, argue that approximately 4,600 Haitians who have been removed from the U.S. in recent weeks should have been allowed to stay and seek asylum as per federal and international law. In other words, the U.S. has committed crimes. Nothing new, but just saying. The United States was able to remove 10 to 15,000 people from under the Del Rio Bridge in less than a motherfucking week. So if they have to protect them, they can do that. U.S. Customs and Border Protection pointed to recent comments by Mayorkas, who said the images last week at the border do not reflect who we are, who we aspire to be, or the integrity or values of our truly heroic personnel in the Department of Homeland Security. He added that the U.S. considered Haiti safe enough for migrants to return to. What the fuck? We have continued to study the conditions in Haiti, and we have in fact determined, despite the tragic and devastating earthquake, that Haiti is in fact capable of receiving individuals. And we are working with Haiti, with the humanitarian relief agencies, to ensure that their return is as safe and humanely accomplished as possible. The U.S. government has employed a number of policies in recent years to deter migrants from crossing the southern border. Many of these disproportionately affect Haitians. The Biden administration is relying on a public health rule known as Title 42 to swiftly remove migrants, including Haitians, encountered at the U.S.-Mexico border. Title 42, invoked during the Trump administration, has come under intense scrutiny by immigrant advocates because it largely bars migrants from seeking asylum in the U.S. The Biden administration has argued that the rule is being invoked to protect the health of migrants, border personnel, and local communities, given the recent influx of people at the border. In September, a federal judge blocked the Biden administration from expelling migrant families with children apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border under the public health order, but put that ruling on pause for 2 weeks. In the interim, the Biden administration appealed it, and an appeals court granted the administration request to put the lower court order on hold. Before Title 42, the U.S. government was turning migrants away through a process known as metering. Back in 2016 is when it started, and those seeking asylum at the border were put on a wait list and told to remain in Mexico until it was their turn to begin the asylum process. Metering primarily targeted Haitian asylum seekers, according to the advocacy group American Immigration Council, and migrants were often made to wait years before their claims were heard. When their cases were finally heard, Haitians were granted asylum at the lowest rates of any nationality for whom data is available. Haitians and other Black migrants, including those from Jamaica, Liberia, and Cameroon, also faced disproportionate contact with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. Last year, more Haitian families were consistently detained by the U.S. than those of any other nationality, according to the Texas nonprofit Races. The group also found that Haitians paid higher bonds than any other detained immigrants, meaning that they also stay in ICE facilities longer. Additionally, Black immigrants make up 20% of those facing deportation on criminal grounds, though they comprise only 7% of the nation's non-citizen population. That's despite the fact that there's no evidence to suggest Black immigrants are more likely than other groups to commit crimes. At the end of the day, it's based upon the racial profiling. The same reasons that we find that African Americans are arrested disproportionately, that they're charged with higher crimes, that they are sentenced to longer periods. All of that applies to Black migrants as well. The rest of this article you can find through MSN, and I will post it in the comments here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not yet. I love you all. I will be back just in a few short moments to start the podcast that I've been telling y'all about, featuring, discussion about R. Kelly, child molestation, abuse, Hollywood, and I will have two panel members on to talk about it. So definitely stay tuned for it. All right, y'all? Be good.